Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and welcome back to another session.
Yes,
and
here
we
we
are
are.
always excited, but today super excited to have Yulia O'Mahony with us from PMI, joining us to talk about that wonderful subject of social health and relationships and the impact of relationships on well-being within that context. Really excited, but we always like to give our guests a nice welcome. But I should say, firstly, Yulia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be here this morning. Lovely to see you as always.
Wonderful. So good to see you. And we're always so inspired when we speak with you. Looking forward to the conversation today, but we want to give you a proper introduction.
Let our guests know who we're talking to.
That's right. So Yulia O'Mahony is currently the Global Head of Health and Resilience at Phillip Morris International, a role that she took up in 2021. And before that, she was John Lewis Partnership's first ever Head of Wellbeing and D&I in 2017. Yulia has a wealth of experience in strategy, operations, and finance, worked for leading consulting firms in the UK, US, Europe, and Russia, and is a sought-after speaker and panelist, speaking at conferences, REBA, Wellbeing at Work, Mad World in UK, as well as taking part in working groups, really with the focus on advancing the employee well-being agenda. Yulia was part of the working group of the WBCSD report on healthy people, healthy business. Yulia believes that sustainable high performance can be achieved only when there is an open, trusting culture and care for individuals' well-being. Yulia is always sharing wonderful research and statistics with us. No surprises, because she holds an MBA from Harvard Business School, PG certificate in psychology and neuroscience of mental health from King's College London, and an MA in computer science from Moscow State Academy of Management, and is an accredited systemic coach. So much wealth of experience and training and expertise. But what we love most of all is your passion for well-being and creating a culture where people can thrive and thrive through relationships. So, Yulia, tell us more about what drives that passion. Where did all this start, and what's the passion that's driving you now?
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, first of all, Andrea. It is fantastic, and just it slightly made my cheeks burn. But thank you so much. That's very kind. In terms of my passion, I think being a consultant and working in very driven consulting environments, as well as very high-paced retail, you see that drive for business results. But sometimes what you discover when you have this drive for business results, that if you don't pay attention to people who actually make all the strategies that we put in place or design as consultants, if you don't have people along with you, nothing will happen. So all these beautiful plans will not materialize. And people need to be involved. And for people to be involved, they need to be treated fairly, they need to be listened to. And actually, as part of my work in John Lewis, we did a project with BRC, British Retail Consortium, where we found that 70% of retail workers at entry level, they have ideas how to improve the business, but only 30% of them think that they will be taken seriously. So here's your productivity opportunity. It's huge, isn't it? But again, if you're treated as, this little part of the system and you don't make any decisions, no one likes to be like that. But for people to feel better and you need to have better relationships in teams, you need to have better relationships with your line manager. And you were talking about statistics, and I think what was interesting for me, both on the positive side and the negative side, relationships always come up as a very important element of what actually impacts our well-being. There was
Yeah.
a study that was done actually even before COVID in the UK that showed that in terms of the stress, the kind of what causes you stress, in 70% of cases, people said it's their peers. So it's their
Okay.
peers.
Yeah.
So it's like your source of stress is your environment, which makes sense, doesn't it? But
Absolutely.
and it's almost like this stress is caused by the breakdown in relationships, something's going wrong. And so while some things you can do yourself in terms of managing your stress reactions, absolutely, in terms of, mindfulness and all these different things, but still, if you fix the underlying cause, that would be super powerful. So it's kind of on the negative side. And also even the recent research by McKinsey Health Institute, which they've done with BITC last year, showed that in terms of the outcomes, both positive and negatives, absence of toxic behaviors, good environment contributes to 60% of this outcome. So it's huge.
You're just talking our language, and as always, giving wonderful research and statistics behind it. Because of course, if relationships help increase our resilience, and if you are in great relationships, then you can work together and solve any problem. But if the relationships themselves are the source of stress, whatever you're doing around that in terms of, as you mentioned, meditation or the exercise and so on, the source of the problem is still there.
Yeah.
How are you? I know you're doing some great work currently through, is it the Be Well program that you have? How are you addressing well-being in your current role?
It is. It's not easy, I have to say, because we all know we want to change the relationships, but where do you start? And also, how do you get common understanding? But the Be Well program we started is a program of well-being champions. So we introduced well-being champions in PMI, and well-being champions, their role is to provide support, to have supportive conversations. If somebody struggles, signpost the resources we have, but importantly, act as energizers and connecting people, creating the sense of community. So as when we discussed it with our co-leads, who are volunteers, they're all volunteers. They come from all sorts of walks of life in terms of business. We have pretty senior leaders in operations, in some of our life sciences, in SFP, which is smoke-free product division. And all of them say that what they want to create is, it's almost like Cool Kids Club. As in, we have this wonderful group of people who are compassionate, sharing. You feel the sense of community. You feel that these people are there to support you and share with you. And we actually ran a campaign with Be Well at the beginning of the year, which was super community driven. And instead of the usual, what's your New Year resolution? It was more share your experiences. And we had this 12 challenges. And it was very, 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 your accomplishments. So it's people who just first done their skiing lesson, or it was absolutely everything and anything, and their favorite dish that they cook. And there was lots of different things which are small, personal, and on one hand innocuous, but at the same time, one of the co-leads of Be Well, she observed that when we bigger up each other and build each other up, and we support each other publicly, it has amazing positive effects. So it's like you create this community, you feel you're part of it, people care about you, they cheer for you, and it just gives you oxytocin boost. And
it just makes you feel like
exactly.
you matter.
You matter. It's positive. It's important. Yeah. Sorry, John.
No. I was going to say how totally on that page, and our sense clearly, and the expectation is that the leaders are the culture carriers of the organization. The question, I guess, and I'll tell you why I asked the question in a second, but the question: how do you get the leaders to buy into that if they're not already bought into it? Because if the leaders get it and they are interested in the well-being of the organization, then things will move forward. I think you drive social health from the top down. We ran a session yesterday with some young people. So in the UK, that's sort of sixth form. For our US audience, that's the top end of high school. And really what we were doing was sharing with them some tips on how do you become a leader, how do you become a successful leader, looking at the different personalities and the different drivers and approaches and work styles. And actually what we took them down was this journey of saying to them, and it's something we shared from a guest shared with us in a recent podcast, this whole concept of to be a leader and a successful leader, you've got to take care and take charge. And too many leaders go in looking to take charge and they forget to take care, either of themselves or of the people around them. And I think well-being sits really at the heart of that taking care bit of yourself and of your people. And if you can do that as a leader, then you're onto something. And the question is, how do you guys communicate that message to the leaders to get them to focus on taking care and not just the taking charge bit?
I love that. I love that, taking care and taking charge. That is absolutely amazing. I'll definitely use it in the future. But in terms of how we communicate, in my experience, people at senior level, they need to believe in it. So it's not intellectual exercise. It's because intellectually, and I tried it so many times, you can show statistics, you can show all sorts of things, but unless you believe in it and you feel it, it's very difficult to get involved. So what we're doing, we have values and we have leadership behaviors that we expect. And as part of leaders' evaluation, the evaluators on how they behave, not just what they deliver. So we have some things in place already, but I think it's also a bit of a mindset shift. And I mentioned this, so it's a cool kids club, but at the same time, what we do is also have a kind of stealth campaign in a way, because, and I say stealth as in we find leaders who are already believe in well-being, and that is important.
Yes, there you go.
And we then work with them to see how we can elevate the notion of well-being in their teams, and also spotlight these leaders and say, okay, this is what good looks like, and this is the result they achieve. And it becomes more of and if they share stories as in, their teams are performing better, and also they don't have the issues with burnout, and they have, so it's almost like building these, not social pressure necessarily, but it's more of if others see that there is a different way and it can be better, and actually caring doesn't mean that you're weak or anything like that. It means that you can get more better results. Not everyone is in that place, obviously.
It's that mindset shift that you mentioned, because we're seeing it now post-COVID. The mindset that says that the only way I can trust you to work is to be back in the office is creeping in again. And people are being forced to turn up to the office without having a clear plan or purpose of why being in the office is so important. Of course, you need to be there to have the social connections and build, learn on the job side by side and so on. But it's more pull rather than push, rather than forcing it, is creating that environment that people want to come to. What have you noticed in terms of people's not just aspirations, what's the word? The shift in values in the kind of workplace that they want, the way they want to be managed. There's this trend post-COVID, this change in what employees are expecting of the workplace. What have you noticed in that shift?
I think it's interesting what you say, Andrea, in terms of shift. I think it's, to be honest, I don't see it as a shift, not to sound controversial, but it's almost like back to the basic human need, which I think Corbett just crystallized, I guess, in a way, as in you think, okay, that's my life. And, the world is uncertain. Why should I, overinvest my time if the company is not going to treat me well? But there are lots of different dynamics.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, but I think the biggest thing which I've noticed is what drives people's stress levels is and obviously not just me, is the uncertainty. And the uncertainty in terms of job security is becoming more and more of an issue. So we have this interesting dichotomy. On one hand, people really want to find jobs that are fulfilling and leave them room for some sort of balance. But also at the same time, they want to hold on to their jobs because you need to feed your family. It's like, it's all very well and good to have purpose, but you need to put food on the table. So it's, but it's almost like there's a bit of a tension between these two things.
Yeah.
But and AI on top, I mean, just make things even more complicated. But it's an interesting dynamic. But I'm hoping, being more of an optimistic side, that humanity will win, or the human side. And I think this human side is sort of emerging because we all want to matter. We want to connect. We want to be with people we feel comfortable with. We want to feel safe to voice our opinion. We want to contribute, because no one comes to work thinking just, here's my paycheck and I'll go away. But it's just very basic and fundamental, and goes back probably to ancient times. It's just this mattering, feeling part of a bigger group, feeling part that, this group will help you and protect you. And this is a very fundamental needs. And especially in the face of uncertainty, it kind of gets more, these feelings become more acute. And I think that's why it's almost like the age of relationship reboot is coming. And personally, I think in schools, we need to teach people how to relate to each other, and which is more important than algebra, in my opinion, because, I was studying econometrics, computer science, and all this sort of good stuff. And I know that, square root of -1 is I. Does it help me day to day? Not that much. But it's like skills in terms of relationships would be vital for everybody. And if we all move to assertive... Yeah, no, I'm sure you would agree on this.
I couldn't contain myself there. 100% agree with you. And we have to give a shout out to Kirsten, who is the founder of Camwell, the Wellbeing Strategy Consultancy. She's the one who shared the line "Take care and take charge" with us. And she also said if she had to choose just one skill that people should learn, it would be about doing relationships well.
Totally.
But I love what you just said, that this is the age of relationship reboots, because I think the more we get into AI, the more the fundamentals of doing relationships well and being human well becomes important. What have you experienced in terms of relationships that have gone bad, challenges in relationships that then get fixed, or how have you been able to do that turnaround? Any stories to share there?
Excellent question, Andrea, because it's something that I've been thinking about. It's how do you turn around relationship, but also what I was thinking, there is there's a big problem generally with relationships in workplace, which is again driven by uncertainty, and that's the passive-aggressive style of communication, which is super difficult to turn around, as you know. And what I've noticed, if it gets to the passive-aggressive stage, as in face-to-face, and I think in British culture in particular, it's like, "Oh, darling, nice to see you," and goes behind your back, does something completely different. And when it gets to this stage, it's super difficult to turn around. And quite a lot of the corporate relationships are in this category. So it's almost like, how do you then turn from this? Or at least it's like, if you're openly aggressive, at least it's kind of conflict is in the open. It's not ideal, and you can say something hurtful, but at least you know what's going on. Whereas when it's underneath in this passive-aggressive stage,
but there's a nice smile on the face.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's It is, and I think that's the biggest problem we have, is how do we gradually get into more open communication, which is the kind of non-violent assertive communication, as they call it. It's you state your needs, but being respectful of others. It's a lot more, and that's the art, as you know, that's the art of how you communicate in a relationship. But I don't have any precise stories, but it's the general thing, because some of it's probably people wouldn't want to be mentioned in this context. But
Yes.
No, of course. Yeah.
but I think what I've noted, usually the issue is assumptions. So if you make assumptions, so you come with kind of preconceived notions as to this is what they want, and miscommunication. So there is something that is unsaid, and either your expectations were very different and you were not very clear what expectations are. And if this happens and this misalignment leads to misunderstanding, and I had some tremendous turnaround in relationship where actually the gentleman who is now the godson of my youngest son, so we had a bit of an argument or problem. So we said something to somebody assuming that he would want this to be communicated, and he got really upset. But because we held it in respect, so first I was thinking, oh God, this is not going to work now. But because we held respect for each other, and we said, okay, this is what we did, this is why we thought it was coming from the place we wanted to help. And he listened to this, and it was quite a dramatic turnaround. But at least we had the open conversation, and it always is emotional to have this open conversation, but it's worth doing. But I think the prerequisites for that are respect and good intent on both sides, and compassion.
That is so well said. Yeah, and it's the skill. So to do relationships well, it's the courage and the care to go there when you see things are broken or there's misunderstanding, so that coming from a good place, you want to, as one of our other podcast guests said,
I was just thinking
you want to make things right instead of just being right. And sometimes the courage to make things right is the skill that we're lacking.
But the other, I thought another point you were going to was actually another guest. We've had such wisdom on the show. We're really excited to be doing this. Great conversations. But another insight, another nugget they shared, and I forget the exact wording, but the sense was, if you start with the assumption that the other person, at least they think their intent is good, that's a great place to start
based on the knowledge that they have.
Based on the knowledge that they have at the time, exactly. Their intent is good. If you start with that assumption, now of course in passive aggressive territory, you've got to understand, you've got to try and think, well, why aren't they in that space? Because then they've moved to a negative intent.
But sometimes passive aggressive is the inability to talk about what they need or what's been misunderstood, and the only way they know to deal with it is, I'm upset with you, but I can't tell you, so I'm going to pretend to be nice to you and tell other people what you've done. I don't know. It goes back to what you said, doesn't it, about if we are taught early enough how to do relationships well, then we can have better conversations and achieve better
and also
results.
what you said about just having, if you have that mutual respect, if at least that's in place, or at least try to establish that, then you've got a better chance of having those conversations and moving beyond the passive aggression. But it's trying to establish that. So yeah, really, really good insights.
So what's the best relationship advice that you have received? What's kind of helped you steer your course through relationships well?
I think it's two big things. One is positive intent. And compassion, because compassion, as in, sometimes people behave in a certain way because they are upset, angry, and it's not necessarily with you, it may be because something is going on in their lives that's tipping them out of balance. And you just don't know what's going on for people. So maybe they just broke up with their boyfriend, or their beloved cat passed away, or whatever it is. But it may be something that's going on for them, which is affecting their ability to manage their stress day to day. So if you're a completely different space, you just need to appreciate where they are, but also assume that, or at least come to the conversation with an open mind. So they're not there to annoy you. It's like very few people,
Yes.
unless they are kind of on the psychopath scale, they would really want to do this. But it's more of a come to it with open mind, compassion, but listen and really listen. And it's difficult to actively listen. And look, I know it means I'm great, but I think what I've noticed is my children, especially my youngest, he gets really upset when he said, "Mommy, you just didn't listen. You're not listening to me. What did I just say?" And I'm thinking, oh God.
You got me.
But it is,
listening is a really powerful.
It is really powerful.
Skill.
And it's foundation of the compassion therapy. And it's the Carl Rogers, who is absolutely amazing man. He said that, the gift of listening is the best gift you can give to someone. Just have this presence where you are there for the person. You're not giving advice. You're not giving anything. So it's like, as part of the coaching, it is incredibly powerful just being there for somebody, listening to their concerns. And this compassion, the positive intent, and with the intent to help people and meet where they are emotionally, can be really powerful in relationships as well.
Yes, that's such a good piece of advice. And I like that phrasing of compassion, being there for people emotionally. But that can be a scary place for leaders and managers, for example, because the way they've been taught to lead and to manage is to focus on the numbers and to be professional and leave the private life out. How do you help pass that approach on, a compassionate approach on,
I think
to create a new mindset for managers?
Yeah, I think the key is not to get into drama triangle, which is usually where things go wrong, as in you become a rescuer and you don't want to be a rescuer. But, and also the biggest difference of compassion and empathy is compassion is more actionable. It's not just you feel with person. It's not so much you feel with person. You feel that they are struggling and you want to do something to alleviate the pain. So that's the compassion. Yeah. And interestingly enough, it's different areas of the brain responsible for these two things. So empathy is very different from compassion. And I think it's important for leaders. So you don't need to be in the empathy space, because that can be exhausting. And also it's not hugely helpful for the person. It's good to, it's a good starting point. So if you don't have empathy, it's very difficult to move to compassion. But compassion is more about seeing that if there's somebody struggling, what can I do to alleviate this pain? But treating them as an adult. So you're not there to take care of your team as kind of mother hen, but it's more of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, but treat them as adults, but understand that people may struggle sometimes. They need some time off. They need to be, do some, things for their personal lives. But it doesn't mean that they're not going to deliver on the work. But you can't expect people to be robots and be in a completely, same space all the time emotionally. And what the emotional energy they can give to work would vary. But at the same time, if you help people during the difficult period, you can get a lot more loyalty if you want to do if you think about it this way. Because then this loyalty will pay off, or loyalty as in you help somebody during the difficult time, you adjusted some of the schedule. When they back to their normal self, then the energy would be probably doubled in terms of what they would commit to work, as opposed to if you are already struggling and you have extra pressure from your boss. how do you expect people to be motivated?
It would end up in resentment. But we saw exactly that with COVID, didn't we? Those managers who were compassionate and checking in and really supporting people during the lockdown period, when the employees came back to work, the loyalty and the engagement went through the roof because they felt seen and they felt like they mattered. And then the reverse was true for those who didn't care enough or didn't check in.
No, compassion certainly sits at the core. I mean, and for any of our listeners who want to go any deeper in that, we've only just come across it ourselves now, but we've been enjoying listening to it and reading it recently. But this book, Compassion at Work, talks exactly about that point.
Awakening compassion
at work.
Yeah.
Go down the compassion route rather than the empathy route. Empathy can be absolutely draining, as you rightly point out here. Compassion has the
compassion is empathy plus the willingness to do something or the ability to do something about it. I like that distinction, to just help people position how they're going to deal with it and treat people as adults, not like, you need to solve everybody's problems like Mother Teresa. So
some wonderful little nuggets coming through here.
Last question then, if we can squeeze it in before the time is up. What advice would you want to pass on to people if you had to choose like one thing, whether to your children, the next generation, the next future set of future leaders in the organization? What advice would you want to, what relationship advice specifically would you want to pass on?
And it may be stuff you're already doing in the one work you're doing, but what pearls of wisdom would you leave with them?
I think if it's one advice, then it will be starting with self-compassion. And start with self-compassion even before you build relationships with others, because it's very difficult to be compassionate if you're not compassionate towards yourself. And it's hard. It's a very hard place for a lot of people because, we're kind of, for whatever reason, a lot of us are driven to perform, driven to help others. We berate ourselves, and not everybody, but that is, if you have the self-compassion muscle, it's a lot easier than to extend compassion to others. So just reflect on your self-compassion first and then extend it to the wider world.
I think there is
relationship
no,
with yourself is important.
Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, it's no surprise that you are in the role that you do. In a well-being role, taking care of yourself. You've got to do that. I mean, as we like to say, when you sit on an aircraft, they tell you put your own oxygen mask on first before you can try and help anybody else. If you don't have it in there, and it's back to that taking care point before you're taking charge. You've got to take care of yourself and then the people around you. But if you don't do that, the wheels come off very quickly. So absolutely great to hear you say that. Self-compassion.
Because that means you have compassion and you can therefore extend it.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. If we could all become more compassionate with ourselves and become more compassionate with the people around us. And of course, to do relationships well, you need to be comfortable in your own skin, which is part of what the self-compassion is all about. I love me as I am, and therefore I can turn up better for you. And then learn the skills to do that well.
Is there, just as we part, is there any resources you might want to point people to if anybody want to find out about some of the great work either that you're doing or stuff that's influenced you, just some stuff that we can leave in the show notes for people? Is there anything that you might want to highlight in that context?
I think there are lots of beautiful books on the subject, such as Paul Gilbert's Compassionate Mind, which I think is a pretty entertaining read. It's kind of think, but it's very interesting. But also, so I'm just looking at my bookshelf on my favorite books, but
I'm sure you've got a whole collection there.
But also I love the work of Rasmus Hogard and the Potential Project, and The Mind of the Leader is an excellent resource in terms of how to be a compassionate leader. And there's some interesting charts there, especially for those who are very structured thinkers. There's some lovely 2x2s, which I find really, really interesting. So in terms of practicing compassion as a leader in particular, I think that's a really good book.
Well,
There are lots more,
I
but
just remembered
unfortunately we
when,
don't have time.
Yeah, no, that's great.
yes,
That is great. Thank you.
when we were chatting before we started recording, you shared, just back to statistics again, one last time, Yulia, you mentioned, was it Harvard Business Review, a recent research, and it was around relationships, 70%, and then 60%. Do you remember the research you were talking about?
Yes, it is. It's McKinsey Health Institute. So it is.
McKinsey.
Yeah, I will share with. I'll share with you the link. So it's McKinsey Health Institute, and they did the research with BITC, British. Yeah, I forgot
Oh,
what
yes,
the
that's what you said.
acronym stand for. Yeah, but
And just share the statistics again, please. Yeah.
Yeah, the statistics is that, in particular, this research, which is more recent, is that 60% of the outcomes for positive outcomes for people at work, as in people being more engaged and happy to do their work, more motivated. 60% of the factor is absence of toxic behaviors and feeling. So basically, good relationships. Good relationships in teams are responsible for the majority of this outcome. So it's pointing to the start of our conversation in terms of social capital. Social capital can disproportionately affect your outcomes for people, both positive and negative. Because as you know, the famous Harvard review of the longevity, I think that the one that was going on for like 60 years or 70 years, we all know that. It points to the single factor. So the single factor that explains why people reach their kind of twilight years in that shape is because of the relationships and because of the social capital. And the more, and the other trends, which are quite worrying in terms of the rise of loneliness and people feeling lonely and disconnected. So the more we as employers create this sense of community, if it's lacking for other areas of people's lives, the better off we'll be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I love those recent figures from the McKinsey Health Institute to show that 60% of all the things that companies are working to achieve now, engagement, loyalty, motivation, performance, 60% of that depends on building great relationships at work. I think that's a brilliant note to end on, because that just absolutely makes the point. Why should we change our core behaviors to be more relational and to build strong relationships? Because it delivers at the end of the day on all these levels. Yulia, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us.
Wisdom, insights, ways to do it. Really, really, really useful. And it's been great having you with us.
Yeah, look forward to the next one. I think there'll have to be a follow-up as you share more wonderful insights and research as they develop over the next few months.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be your guest. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships, so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.